Hello Year 7, this is Miss Smith and today we are going to talk about digestion. Now I know you've already heard from Dr. Hill last week and she told you all about the importance of a healthy diet and nutrition, but today we are going to have a look at what actually happens to your food when you eat it. So, before we start, I would like you to have a look at these 5 starter questions. This is the exact same thing that we will be doing in lessons if you were in school, so you know the drill. We've got 5 questions. I want you to have a think and then write down any answers that you can think of. And then in about a minute, we'll come back and we will go through the answers. So, we have got question 1. What is the purpose of a food bank? Number 2, name 2 people that would have different balanced diets. Number 3, what does the word diet mean? Number 4, which nutrient group is not digested by the body? And number 5, which nutrient group is important for hydration? Okay, you've got 1 minute. Let's have a little think of those questions and write down any answers that you know. Okay, so you've had a minute. Hopefully you have had plenty of time to write down some answers. So let's go through them. Number 1, what is the purpose of a food bank? It is to ensure that everybody has a reliable source of food in emergencies. Give yourself a tick if you got that right. Name 2 people that would have different balanced diets. Now, there are lots of different combinations that you could have, so don't worry if the example that I've got on the screen isn't the same as yours. There is a very good chance that that could also be correct. But the one that we've gone with is an old person would have a very different diet to an Olympic athlete. Another example that you could have is a child having a different type of balanced diet to an adult. Number 3, what does the word diet mean? It is simply the food a person consumes. Regardless of whether it is a balanced or unbalanced diet, or whether it is healthy or unhealthy, the food that one person consumes during the day is their diet. Number 4, the nutrient group that is not digested by the body is, of course, fibre, and the nutrient group that is important for hydration is water. Now, I'd like you to give yourself a mark out of 5. And if there are any answers that you didn't get in this red box, I'd like you to make those corrections now. Whilst you're doing that, did anybody have a look at the super challenge box at the bottom? Why do cows have 4 stomachs? Now, this is a very interesting question because humans obviously have got 1 stomach that has 1 chamber, but cows actually have 4 chambers in their stomach, and there is a very important reason for that. They are something that is called a ruminant, and it's to do with the food that they eat, which mainly is grass. Now, grass is made up of quite a lot of fibre, and just like humans, they do struggle to digest fibre. So what happens is a cow will take a mouthful of grass, chew that up in their mouth, and then swallow it, and it will enter the first chamber of their stomach, where it will be broken down, and then it will be regurgitated into their mouths, where they will chew it again until it's broken down even more, and then they're going to swallow it again, and this process is going to repeat until they've got all those essential nutrients out of the grass before it is excreted. So, as I've said, we are looking at digestion. So our learning objective for today is to understand exactly what happens during that process of digestion. By the end of the lesson, everybody will be able to describe the function of each part of the digestive system. Now, what that means is that you'll be able to describe the job or the role that each part or each organ in the digestive system has. From there, you'll be able to describe the importance of the bacteria that's inside your digestive system and how that helps in digestion. And you'll be able to explain the adaptations of the small intestines. Now, that word adaptation is very important in science, and it means what sort of features, what special or unique things the small intestine has that helps it complete its job properly. Finally, before we move on, we're going to look at the key skills box, and today it's all about vocabulary. So these important scientific terms that you need to know. Now, I'm sure there are some on the screen that you will have heard of already, but there are some that you may not have come across before. So don't worry, by the end of the lesson, you will know what each of those words mean. So for now, let's just have a little look at them. We've got intestine, enzyme, bacteria, hydrochloric acid, stomach, and esophagus. Now, for example, I'm fairly certain that most of you have heard of the stomach and you've got a pretty good idea of its job and what it does during digestion. But I'm thinking some of you might not have heard the word enzyme before. You might not have heard of esophagus or hydrochloric acid, but that is not to worry. Like I said, by the end of this lesson, you will know exactly what these words mean and what role they play in digestion. So, what exactly is digestion? It is the breakdown of food inside your body. So, any food that you eat during the day will be digested. It's broken down into smaller pieces so it can be absorbed into your bloodstream, and nutrients from the food are used to help you grow, and they also help repair the body if it gets damaged. So for example, if you fall over on the year 7 yard and you graze your knee, a scab will form, and then after a few days, maybe a week, the scab will be gone and your skin will be as good as new. Those nutrients that have been digested and removed from your food, they help repair the skin. Another thing that can happen is the release of energy. And that's extremely important for things like movement. So if you're running about, playing football, the energy that you use is released from the food that you eat. Now, where exactly in your body is food absorbed? If you look at this diagram over here on the right, there are several different structures or organs shown, and each one of those has an important job in the digestion of the food that you eat. And as we go through the lesson, we are going to identify what their functions or jobs are and what happens when the food reaches them. So, digestion, as we know, is where your body breaks down the food that you eat into smaller pieces so it can be absorbed. The useful bits, those nutrients that you spoke about last week, are absorbed through your small intestine, and they are transported into the blood, where those nutrients are carried all over the body to help keep your body running. So, if we have a little look at this diagram at the bottom, you can see that on the left-hand side, we have got food in the small intestines, and on the right-hand side, we have got the bloodstream. Right down the middle, separating the two, we've got a dotted line that we are using to represent the wall of the small intestine. That means that we are keeping what's inside the small intestines separate from the bloodstream. We wouldn't want blood getting into the small intestines, for example. However, You will obviously have spotted that there are gaps in this line. This is to allow those essential nutrients to pass from the small intestine into the blood so they can be carried around the body. Now, this is important because, for example, if you had a very large piece of food, like this that I'm drawing on the screen, there is no way that that huge piece of food is going to fit through that gap. It's just not going to happen. That is why digestion is so important. So we can break this large piece of food into all these much smaller pieces and all those essential nutrients so they are small enough to diffuse or pass through the wall of the small intestine and be absorbed into the blood. So, when we talk about the digestive system, the very first place that we need to talk about is, of course, the mouth. As you can see from this picture, this is the very first place where food is broken down. This lady in the picture is about to take a big bite of an apple. So we know that her teeth are going to start breaking down that piece of apple, that food, into smaller pieces. The teeth are going to chew and grind up that food so it's smaller and much easier to swallow. So the teeth are physically breaking it down. Another thing that happens when you're chewing food is that your mouth fills with a liquid. Now, this is called saliva, which is the scientific word that we have to use when we're talking about spit. We can't call it spit when we're scientists. We have to use the proper scientific word, and it's called saliva. And inside the saliva is something called enzymes. Now, these are proteins that we're going to talk about properly in the next lesson, but what you need to know is that these proteins help digest food chemically. So we have the teeth breaking food down physically and the enzymes breaking it down chemically. The saliva also has a second function, and it lubricates the food, meaning that it makes it much easier to swallow. You won't want something very dry in your throat. It makes it very difficult to swallow. So that saliva makes it much easier to pass down your throat. But again, we're scientists. We do not call it the throat. We have to use another scientific term, that is esophagus. Now, this does look like quite a complicated word, but it is a key word. So when it comes to your exams, you need to make sure that you can spell esophagus correctly. So it's O-E-S-O-P-H-A-G-U-S, esophagus. Don't worry, you don't have to be able to pronounce it. You just need to make sure that you know the spelling. And the job of the esophagus is to connect the mouth to the stomach. So this little highlighted structure is the esophagus. Now, as you can see, the food is pushed down the esophagus into the stomach by muscular contractions. So this structure is extremely muscular. So as you swallow, the muscles in the esophagus are going to push that chewed up food down into your stomach. And there is a word that we use for that. It's called bolus. So chewed up food is referred to sometimes as bolus. Now, we've gone from the mouth down the esophagus into the stomach, which is this structure here. And again, this is extremely muscular, and this is going to squeeze and contract and churn up the food, helping to break it down into smaller pieces. A liquid is also added, and this is called hydrochloric acid. Now, this liquid in particular is something that we do use in science quite a lot, so you may have come across it already. It's sometimes called HCl, referring to the elements that are inside it, so hydrogen and chlorine. You might remember that from some chemistry lessons. But hydrochloric acid is extremely important when we talk about digestion. So it's inside your stomach and it helps with the breakdown of food. It's also very important in the process of digestion when we talk about enzymes. Remember those proteins from the last slide that I mentioned? Inside your stomach, there are very special proteins that can help chemically break down food, and they need to work in a very acidic environment, and that's why we add acid. That helps those enzymes work properly to help break down the food even more. So the stomach's done its job. The food is then going to exit through here and enter the small intestine. So this orange structure here is representing the start of the small intestine. But you will notice that there is this pink structure here and a green structure here. Now the pink one is called the pancreas and the green one's called the gallbladder. Now it is very important for you to know that the food does not go into the pancreas and it does not go into the gallbladder. There is no food found inside either of those organs. Instead, you'll be able to see here, there is a little connection where the pancreas and the gallbladder can secrete liquids that will help with the digestion of our food, which makes sense. So, your pancreas, the pink structure, is an organ below your stomach and above your small intestines. And as the food passes from the stomach to the small intestine, the pancreas will secrete enzymes and other substances into your small intestines that will help break down the food even more. So as the food passes through, the pancreas will secrete some enzymes which will further help break down the food. The gallbladder does exactly the same thing, but instead of enzymes, it will have bile. Now, bile is something that is actually made in the liver, but it will be stored in the gallbladder. And bile is secreted into the food, which helps break down the food, and in particular, it helps break down fat. So that's the main job. It helps with the breaking down of fats. It also has a second job, which is very important. You need to remember for your GCSEs, and that is to neutralize the stomach acid, the HCl. As we said on the last slide, you need hydrochloric acid in the stomach to help those enzymes work. And your stomach is very, very resilient to acid. It won't be damaged. However, your small intestines can become very damaged by stomach acid if it's not neutralized. So the bile is added to make sure that the small intestines don't get damaged by that acid, whilst also helping to break down fats. Now, let's talk about the small intestines in more detail. This diagram here shows us the big tangle of small intestines. And it's a very long structure that the food has to pass through. So the small intestines actually has a large surface area and a very good blood supply. And this is to make sure that food and nutrients are absorbed properly into the blood. Villi line the small intestines. So the inside structure of the small intestine is lined by millions and millions of these finger-like projections called villi. And they provide a large surface area to allow for the absorption of nutrients into the blood. So if we look at this picture, you can see the inside of the small intestine. So this big gap is where the food will pass through. It's like the inside of a hose pipe, but you'll be able to see that it's not smooth. It's actually covered in these finger-like projections. They look like fingers or sausages, and they are called villi. This diagram here on the bottom right shows one of those structures. So the singular word is villus. Villi is plural. So we're just looking at one now, and this is showing the inside structure. This line here that I'm following with my cursor, that's red and then it turns to blue, is called a capillary, and that's one of our blood vessels. That means that the blood is flowing right inside the villus. Over here is the inside of the small intestine, and the nutrients need to be absorbed into the blood, so they will diffuse through these cells into the blood. And this all happens inside this organ, the small intestines. Now, before we move on, you will have spotted that there is a blue oval down here, and it says that millions and millions of bacteria live inside your small intestines, and they help your body to digest and absorb food. Now, you may have heard the word bacteria before, maybe about things that make you poorly or unwell. Now, those type of bacteria exist, but the ones that are in your digestive system, inside your small intestine, are not the same type. This bacteria is very good bacteria. You need it to help break down your food. Bad bacteria, bacteria that can make you ill, are very different. But you just need to be aware that there are millions of good bacteria inside your small intestines that help you digest your food. So once we've gone through the small intestines, we will pass into the next organ, which is the large intestine. So as you can see, we have the blue structure, that's our small intestine, and this structure, that is the large intestine. Now you might be thinking why they're called the small and the large intestine. If you look, you can actually see there's more with the small intestine, but it actually refers to the diameter, the lumen or the space inside the organ. It's much, much thinner inside the small intestine than it is in the large intestine. So even though the small intestine is longer, it is still smaller than the large intestine. So the food will pass from the small intestine into the large intestine here, and it will travel all the way along until we get to the rectum and the anus. However, before we get down here, we need to discuss what happens along this route. The large intestine follows from the small intestine, and its role is to absorb the water from the digested food. You know that water is the food group that is very important to hydration and keeping our body hydrated. So we do not want to lose any water in waste that leaves our body. So the last thing that needs to happen is water to be absorbed from the large intestine. Once all the water has been removed from that waste, it will be stored in the rectum until you need to go to the bathroom, and then it will exit through the anus. So we've just discussed it. The job of the large intestine is to absorb water from feces. Now, you might have heard the word feces before, but are you sure about what it means? This emoji gives you a clue. Again, we're scientists. We are not allowed to use the word poo. We have to use the word feces. So that's what it means. Poo is feces. Again, it's a bit of an odd word to spell, but it is a key word and you must make sure you know how to spell it. F-A-E-C-E-S, feces. You must use that word instead of poo. So, if the large intestine's job is to remove water from that feces, what happens if it passes through too quickly and there's lots of liquid still inside it? Have we all heard of diarrhea before? This is what happens when there's too much liquid left inside your feces. You get diarrhea, which is extremely, extremely unpleasant. Does that give you an idea of some of the symptoms of diarrhea then? If there's too much liquid, your feces is going to be very watery and very liquidy. Now, finally, I'm just going to give you a quick overview about enzymes. like I said, the next lesson we are going to talk about enzymes properly. But what you need to know now is that inside the stomach and the small intestines, and also the saliva found in your mouth, there are proteins called enzymes, and they help with chemical reactions, just like digestion, and help them happen faster. So if we look at this little diagram here on the bottom left, our enzyme is represented by this blue shape here. The dark blue is something called a substrate. Now, a substrate is anything at all that we want to break with an enzyme. So in this case, the substrate is going to be a large piece of food. And you'll have noticed that it's going to work just like a jigsaw. This area here, the red line, is what we call the active site. And its shape is complementary to the shape of the substrate. So the substrate is going to come in and fit perfectly into the shape that is provided on the enzyme. So this curved structure will fit perfectly in here, and then this shape will fit perfectly in here. It will lock and end up looking like this. So, supposed to be an arrow, ignore that. This is our enzyme substrate complex. That basically just means that the enzyme has bound to the substrate. And from there, we can break it down into our final products. You can see here that the blue substrate has been broken by the enzyme into a green and a yellow. So that would be the process of chemically breaking down our food. And that happens in the mouth, the stomach, and the small intestine. Like I said, we're going to have a full lesson on this, but that is just a brief overview. So, today's lesson, final recap. We have described the function of each part of the digestive system. We've travelled from the mouth all the way through to the large intestines and explained what every single organ in the digestive system does. We've also explained the importance of bacteria in digestion. We know that there are millions of good bacteria in our small intestines that help us break down our food so we can get some useful nutrients. And finally, we've explained the adaptations of the small intestines. We know that the inside of the small intestine is lined with finger-like projections called villi, which is the plural, villus for the singular. So one is a villus, lots is villi. And we know that that finger-like projection provides a large surface area so our nutrients and food can be absorbed into the blood properly. So, what have we learned today? How did you learn it? How does it relate to other things you know in science and other subjects? That's what you need to have a think about now before you move on and have a little go at the Educate questions that have been set for you. I hope this has been interesting and that you've enjoyed doing this, and I will speak to you again soon about the enzymes that we will talk about in the next lesson. Bye, Year 7.